Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
If you've ever had that moment where your stomach drops before your mind even catches up, you'll understand what I felt when I opened my phone that morning and saw the photo. There it was, right at the top of my Instagram feed, posted 3 hours ago by none other than my sister Becca. A scenic, drone-shot panorama of a luxury ski lodge nestled between pine trees dusted with powdery snow. The caption reading, "Family Weekend." Finally. Couldn't ask for a better way to start the new year. The second photo in the carousel was even worse. Our mom, our dad, Becca, her husband Tyler, and a few of their friends, all bundled up in matching winter jackets, smiling in front of a blazing stone fireplace, wine glasses in hand, surrounded by cozy, high-end rustic decor. The kind of lodge that costs more per night than some people's rent. And me? Not a word. Not a mention. Not even a courtesy text. At first, I thought maybe this was some kind of old photo. Maybe something from last year. Maybe Becca had posted it late, or it was one of those dumb memory throwbacks people post when they have nothing going on. But then I noticed the date stamped on the bottom of one of the photos, clear as day, on the corner of a printed lift pass. January 5th. Today. I stared at my screen in disbelief, my thumb hovering over the heart icon, not sure whether I should like it to keep up appearances or let the silence speak for itself. And then came the wave. The heat in the chest. The sudden swirl of emotion that you'd think I'd be used to by now, but somehow never am, the feeling of being excluded from my own damn family. I didn't call Becca. I didn't text her either. That would have been giving her what she wanted, an excuse to play the victim, to turn it all around and make me the problem. No, I called my mother. I called Carol. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned. Confused. She answered on the second ring. "Hi honey," she said, way too casually, like I wasn't about to ask her why the hell she and the rest of our family were apparently in Aspen or Vail, or wherever the hell this five-figure snow palace was located without me. I asked, calmly at first, "Where are you?" There was a pause. A long one. That kind of pause that says she was expecting this call but hoping it wouldn't come. "Oh. Becca planned a little weekend up at the lodge," she said, like that explained anything. "You mean the lodge you've been telling me for months you couldn't afford to go to because the timing wasn't right? That lodge." She didn't respond immediately. I could hear the fire crackling in the background, the clink of glasses, laughter in the distance. It felt like being on the other side of a glass wall, pounding on it, screaming, while everyone else sat around pretending I didn't exist. "Well, it's what your sister wanted," she said finally, as if that was supposed to pacify me. As if Becca wanting something automatically made it justified. I didn't yell. I didn't sob. I just sat there, holding the phone to my ear with one hand and gripping the counter with the other. I was in my kitchen alone, with a leftover Chinese takeout container and a bottle of cheap red wine from Trader Joe's, while the rest of my family was off living their Pinterest-perfect lives in a winter wonderland I had apparently been deemed unworthy of. "She wanted it?" I repeated, my voice flat. "So everyone just went along with it? Nobody thought to say, hey, maybe Renee should be included since, I don't know, she helped pay for the damn cabin?" Mom sighed, and I could practically hear the guilt dripping down the line like sap from a tree. "It's just." Becca said she didn't want drama. She thought you might not enjoy it, with all the couples and the baby, and I froze. "The baby? Oh, I thought you knew." "No, Mom. I didn't know. Because no one told me. Because, apparently, I'm the family's best-kept secret." The conversation ended with some mumbled excuse about poor reception and a promise to call me when things calmed down. I hung up without saying goodbye. I just sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, phone in one hand, wine in the other, breathing heavily, trying to ignore the growing pit of something between rage and heartbreak in my stomach. And then it hit me. That cabin, the one they were all staying in, wasn't theirs. Not fully. Not legally. Years ago, before my divorce, when I had a steady job and more money than sense, I'd helped our parents buy that place. I'd put in close to 50% of the down payment, under the verbal agreement that I'd be included in every decision about its use. But when I lost my job during the downturn and moved 2 states away, things shifted. Becca stepped in. Tyler started covering some of the taxes. Slowly but surely, my name started getting dropped from family conversations about the lodge. Still, the county records hadn't changed. I knew that because I checked. Every year, when I paid my half of the property taxes, the statement still came addressed to me and my dad. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the drawer where I kept important documents. After a minute of rifling through old folders, I found what I was looking for: the deed. There it was, in black and white, my name, carved into county records as a partial owner of that fancy little slice of alpine heaven they were so happily enjoying without me. And that was the moment something in me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, like a door locking. They had made their choice. Becca had drawn the line. And maybe it was time I finally acted like someone who mattered. Maybe it was time I reminded them that I wasn't just the forgotten older sister who got left out of Instagram-worthy vacations. I was still someone who had a say. I poured myself the rest of the wine, looked out the window at the dead winter sky, and made a quiet decision. They wanted a ski weekend? Fine. But they were about to get a cold one. There's a specific kind of anger that doesn't announce itself loudly, that doesn't shout or throw things across a room or slam doors in anyone's face, but instead simmers slowly. Like a kettle you forgot you put on the stove until suddenly the kitchen is filled with steam and you're not sure whether to turn it off or let it boil dry and burn the damn place down. That's what I felt driving through the icy switchbacks of Route 72 the following morning, as the sharp winter sun cut through the windshield and my fingers clenched the steering wheel tighter with every mile that passed. I wasn't planning to go all the way up to the cabin. Not yet. I wasn't going there to make a scene or to show up uninvited, standing on the porch with my arms crossed while they scrambled to make excuses for why they forgot to invite me. No, this wasn't going to be one of those petty, dramatic confrontations that people whisper about for years afterward and twist into something uglier than it ever was. What I was doing wasn't about yelling. It was about reminding. What they didn't seem to realize, or maybe they did and just figured I'd keep playing the role of the quiet, dependable daughter who lets things slide, was that I still had a say in that cabin. Despite Becca's sparkling white smile and Tyler's smug confidence, despite all the behind-the-back maneuvering they'd done over the past few years, I had never sold my share. I had never signed away my rights. The property was technically in a family trust, and my name was still on the books, and that gave me just enough leverage to do exactly what I intended to do next. I pulled into the parking lot behind the small utility office just outside West Ridge, a quiet little town that existed mostly to serve the vacation crowd, people who came up for a weekend of snow and selfies, then disappeared back into their lives in the city, never thinking twice about who kept the roads plowed or the lights on. The office was squat and square, with an outdated sign that still said Mountain Electric Cooperative, even though the company had changed names over a decade ago. I walked in, deed in hand, wrapped in the kind of coat you wear when you're not trying to look good, just warm and ready to be taken seriously. The woman behind the desk had the sort of permanent expression that said she'd seen every version of every mountain drama play out in real time. She didn't even blink when I handed her the papers and asked to suspend service to cabin 46B, water, electric, and Wi-Fi, citing owner dispute as the reason, which was one of the boxes on the form, believe it or not. She asked for ID. I gave it to her. She scanned everything, tapped something into her old keyboard, and just like that, it was done. No fuss. No drama. I was polite, even thanked her. She offered me a receipt. I folded it into my coat pocket, the paper still warm from the printer, like proof that I hadn't just fantasized the whole thing in a wine-fueled fit of indignation. Driving back down the mountain, I passed the turnoff to the lodge but didn't stop. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to risk catching a glimpse of the family gathered on the deck, roasting marshmallows, laughing, wearing matching sweaters, looking like the exact image Becca always wanted our family to be: glossy, presentable, effortless. I didn't want to see her pretending everything was fine while knowing she'd cut me out like a dead limb, all because I didn't fit the clean, curated narrative of her perfect little life. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned my phone off. Not just airplane mode, not silent, off. Completely powered down. No calls. No texts. No buzzing guilt. No social media to check obsessively for signs of who is saying what. Just silence. I tossed it into the glove compartment like a stone I didn't want to carry anymore, rolled down the window slightly despite the chill, and let the sharp wind sting my face. It was the first moment in what felt like years that I'd allowed myself to disconnect, not just from the people who had hurt me, but from the version of myself that always had to respond, always had to apologize, always had to justify her place in a family that treated her like a guest in her own story. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. There was something satisfying, almost soothing, about knowing they'd wake up in that lodge without heat, without hot water, and without a clue why the internet wouldn't connect. I imagined Becca's face, that practiced smile cracking just a bit, her voice turning sharp as she blamed the weather or the staff or Tyler for not checking the systems. I imagined Mom wringing her hands, whispering nervously about calling someone, and Dad, silent as ever, probably flipping through the cabin's manual, looking for answers that wouldn't be there. I imagined it all not with glee, not with vengeance, but with a strange sense of equilibrium. They had chosen to exclude me. They had drawn the line. I had merely stepped back and let them freeze on the other side of it. But of course, it didn't stay quiet for long. I turned my phone back on the next morning, mostly out of habit. The second the screen lit up, it was flooded with messages. First from Becca, 5 texts in a row, no greeting, just demands. Something's wrong with the power. Can you call the utilities? We don't have heat. Then Tyler chimed in, did you mess with the cabin? Then Mom, honey, can you please call me? Something's not right up here. I didn't answer. I didn't even read the rest. I just sat there in my bathrobe, sipping my coffee slowly, letting the messages pile up like snowdrifts on the front porch of a house you no longer care to shovel. But then, something new came through, from a number I didn't recognize. It was a text, no name attached, just a photo. The image loaded slowly, my Wi-Fi dragging its feet like it could sense the shift in tone. And then it appeared, a blurry, dimly lit shot of a baby, tiny, red-faced, swaddled in what looked like a towel, crying. The message below it said, she's freezing. Please. I stared at it for a long time, my coffee turning cold in my hand, my breath catching just slightly in my throat. Because I didn't know what scared me more, the idea that Becca had dragged a baby up into a mountain lodge with no heat and thought I was the one being cruel, or the sinking realization that I had no idea she even had a baby. There's a particular way your heart skips a beat when you realize something isn't just wrong, but that you might have miscalculated the entire situation in a way that leaves you suddenly vulnerable, exposed, and maybe, just maybe, in deeper than you meant to go. That photo of the baby, swaddled in a towel and visibly crying, set off something in me that wasn't quite panic and wasn't quite guilt, but an uncomfortable combination of the two that made me sit very still. Like any sudden movement might break something invisible, but fragile that I didn't even know I'd been holding onto. I stared at the screen for far too long, not reacting, not blinking, just watching the blurry pixels of a crying infant morph in and out of focus, as though trying to determine if what I was seeing was even real. Because here's the thing, I didn't know Becca had a child. Not a peep, not a post, not even a secondhand mention from our mother during one of her bi-weekly guilt-laced check-ins. And it wasn't like I lived off the grid or had been estranged for decades. I was on group texts. I showed up for holidays. I had bought Becca a silver-rimmed glass punch bowl for her wedding because she said she wanted to start hosting more adults-only parties. I had stood beside her while she played bride, while she played hostess, while she played golden girl of the family. And yet, somehow, a baby, an actual baby, had come into existence without my knowledge, and now, apparently, I was the one who had put that baby in danger. The narrative was already forming in my head, like one of those slow drip poisonings where the symptoms don't appear until it's too late to reverse them. Becca would tell our parents that I had shut off the power to the cabin knowing full well that there was a child inside. She would imply that it had been deliberate, that I was unstable, vengeful, possibly even dangerous. And Mom, sweet, conflict-avoidant Carol, would do what she always did, take Becca's side, Not because she believed her, but because believing me would mean admitting they'd failed to protect me for years. But something wasn't adding up. The photo, that grainy, almost too perfect image of the baby, looked staged. Not in an overt, Hollywood kind of way, but in the way that someone who wants to provoke a very specific emotional response chooses an image they know will bypass logic and hit straight into your chest. There was something off about the lighting, about the way the baby was bundled in what looked more like a bathroom towel than a proper blanket. And something about the framing, too close, too deliberate, as if whoever took it wanted to make absolutely sure the tears were front and center, didn't sit right with me. So I did what any person would do when they're not sure if their reality is being manipulated. I started digging. I turned the photo around, ran it through a reverse image search, and within seconds my screen pulled up 5 nearly identical stock photos from a parenting website based out of Canada. The same baby, the same towel, the same expression, just cropped differently. Becca, or someone with enough sense to know how easy it is to fake a crisis, had taken an image from the internet and used it to guilt-trip me, to manipulate me, to make me believe I had endangered a child that didn't even exist. My chest tightened, but not in fear this time, in a kind of slow-burning rage that settled into my spine like a bar of steel. It wasn't just the lie. It wasn't just the fact that she had used a baby as a pawn. It was the realization that this wasn't new. This had been happening for years in smaller, less dramatic forms, the way she'd cry when confronted, the way she'd reframe every conflict as something she had merely endured rather than caused, the way she weaponized softness, femininity, motherhood, like some kind of shield made of silk and passive aggression. I scrolled through the rest of my messages, more from Becca, more from Tyler, and one particularly long voicemail from my mother that I refused to listen to, and finally landed on one short message from an unfamiliar number. It read, "Call her. She's scared." That was it. No name, no context, just the assumption that I owed someone comfort after being gaslit into thinking I'd put an infant at risk. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and called my mother. Not because I wanted clarity, but because I knew I wouldn't get it from Becca directly, and if there was even the faintest sliver of truth buried in the mess, I needed to hear it from someone whose default mode wasn't full-scale manipulation. She answered on the first ring, her voice already trembling with that tightness she got when she was afraid of confrontation, but couldn't avoid it anymore. "Renee," she started, and I could hear the apology trying to squeeze its way into the first syllable. "Is there a baby?" I asked, cutting straight through her performance, "or is your younger daughter just using stock photography to manufacture sympathy again?" The pause on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Mom sighed, audibly, like she'd just been asked to lift something too heavy. "Becca, didn't want to tell you." "Didn't want to tell me what?" I snapped. "That she has a kid? Or that she doesn't, and she just wanted me to think she did so I'd come rushing up the mountain like some kind of villain in a redemption arc." "She and Tyler are in the process," Mom said finally, which only made things murkier. "They're fostering. It's not permanent. They're just trying to figure things out quietly. She was afraid you'd judge her." I laughed, short, humorless, not even a real laugh, just a noise. "She lied, Mom. She sent me a fake photo of a crying baby to manipulate me. And you're defending her because, what?" She meant well. "No," she whispered, the first honest word I'd heard since the entire ordeal began. "I'm just tired." That made 2 of us. I hung up without saying goodbye, tossed my phone onto the couch, and stood there in my living room staring at the blank wall where a painting had once hung before I sold it to cover my half of the taxes on that godforsaken cabin. There was nothing left to misunderstand now. Becca had lied. She had tried to guilt me into undoing the one boundary I'd finally had the strength to set. And she had done it with the confidence of someone who had been getting away with this kind of thing for her entire life. But not this time. This time, I had the receipts. And I wasn't just going to sit back and let her get away with it. The truth is, there's a particular type of emotional injury that doesn't bruise the skin or leave any visible scars, but instead burrows itself somewhere deeper. Somewhere you can't reach no matter how many apologies you get or how many glasses of wine you drink trying to dull it, and it usually comes not from strangers or enemies, but from the very people who were supposed to love you without conditions. So when I stood there in the middle of my living room, staring blankly at the voicemail transcripts that kept pouring in from Becca, Tyler, and Mom, none of them acknowledging the lie, none of them apologizing for the manipulation. Just circling around the same performative concern for each other and skirting the fact that I had been, once again, cast in the role of the unstable outsider. I knew that if I didn't act now, if I didn't take back even one piece of what was mine, then I never would. I packed a duffel bag with nothing more than a sweater, a toothbrush, and the file folder with the original trust agreement for the cabin, the one I had kept, almost forgotten, in the back of my filing cabinet under divorce paperwork and expired health insurance plans. The paper was creased and a little yellow at the edges, but the signatures were still legible, mine included, next to my father's, dated back when I still believed that shared property meant shared respect. The drive up the mountain was long and slow, the roads slick with old snow and half-melted slush, and for most of the trip I kept imagining what I'd say to Becca if she answered the door, what I'd do if she cried, what I'd do if she smiled like none of it mattered. Like I was being too sensitive again, like everything she'd done was just part of some misunderstood attempt at closeness. But when I pulled into the narrow, gravel drive leading to the cabin and saw the black SUV with Colorado plates parked in the front, when I saw the flicker of orange light coming from inside, evidence of a fire, warmth, comfort, all the things they'd stolen from me in both literal and metaphorical ways, the need for a dramatic speech vanished. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted the truth. I wanted the lie to collapse under its own weight. The knock on the door was solid, deliberate, and when it opened a few seconds later, it wasn't Becca standing there, it was Tyler. Tyler, with his carefully trimmed beard and the permanent smirk of someone who thought he was always one step ahead, leaned against the door frame with a smugness that made me instantly regret not punching him 3 years ago at their engagement party when he made a joke about me being the artsy sister with feelings. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked entertained. "Well," he said, crossing his arms and shifting his weight like this was all part of a game he was enjoying far too much. "I was wondering how long it'd take you to show up." I didn't say anything. I held up the manila folder and stepped forward. "I'm here to get clarity," I said, calmly but firmly. "And I'd like to speak to my sister." He chuckled, which was a mistake. "You're wasting your time, Renee," he said, moving just slightly to block the doorway, not in a physical way, but in a symbolic one, like he was claiming the territory in front of him. "You might want to go home and look up something called a quiet title action. Or maybe check your mail. Becca sent you notice months ago." The words didn't register at first, not really, because they were absurd. Legal language used like a weapon, the kind of thing rich men married to manipulative women say when they've spent too much time around estate lawyers and not enough time considering whether they're human beings. But he repeated it. "She filed a quiet title claim last year. You didn't respond. Default judgment. Her name's on the deed now." I pushed past him, not with force, but with the certainty that only comes when you stop caring about being polite. The inside of the cabin hadn't changed much. The same exposed beams, the same stone fireplace, the same mismatched furniture we all chipped in to buy during the first winter we opened it. Becca wasn't in the living room, but I could hear her voice down the hall, soft and annoyed, the way it always was when she thought she was being inconvenienced. She stepped out of the guest room just as I reached the hallway, her face flushing as she saw me, surprise mingling with guilt and something much colder beneath it. "You weren't supposed to come here," she said, her voice not angry but tired, as though I were the one intruding, as though this was somehow my fault. "Did you really file a quiet title?" I asked, my voice even. She didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "You forged my signature," I said, louder now, the accusation filling the space like smoke. "You sent the documents to an address you knew I didn't live at anymore, didn't you? So I'd missed the deadline to contest it. You knew I'd never get the notice." "It's not like you ever wanted to be involved," she said, which was possibly the most grotesquely manipulative sentence I'd ever heard, and coming from her, that was saying something. "You live 4 hours away. You're always busy. You've made it clear this family exhausts you." This family doesn't exhaust me, I said, my voice trembling now not from fear, but from fury. You do. Becca didn't respond. She just turned away, as if that ended the conversation, as if we were finished, as if I was a moment she could walk past like a puddle in the road. But then I noticed something strange. The crib in the corner of the guest room was empty. There was no baby monitor, no bottles, no diapers. Just a perfectly staged setup, like a catalog photo, untouched and unused. Like it had been placed there for effect, to support a narrative. "Where's the baby?" I asked coldly. Becca's shoulders stiffened, and that was all I needed to see. "You never brought her here," I said, stepping closer. "You faked it. All of it. Just like you've always faked being the good daughter, the generous one, the perfect host. You lied because you needed me to be the villain. Because you've never known how to survive without making someone else look worse." She didn't deny it. Not even a word. Just walked back toward the kitchen, called out something to Tyler, and then slammed the cabinet shut hard enough that I could hear glass rattle. I walked back to the front door without saying goodbye. I didn't take anything, didn't slam anything, didn't look back. Because in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do next, and it wasn't going to involve a fight or a screaming match. It was going to involve a courthouse. And this time, I wouldn't miss the deadline. There's a silence that sets in after certain revelations, a kind of thick, suffocating quiet that doesn't come from the absence of sound but from the implosion of trust, the irreversible collapse of something you thought, for better or worse, would always be standing. And as I drove back down that mountain, the engine humming steadily beneath me and the winter sun throwing long, cold shadows across the winding road, all I could hear was that silence wrapping itself around my ribs like wire. The image of the empty crib in the guest room kept flashing through my mind, not because it shocked me. By then I knew in my gut that the baby had never been there, but because it confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, that my sister had spent months building a lie so precise, so insidious, that it required furniture, photographs, and forged legal documents to maintain its illusion. And worst of all, it worked, because for a moment, a real moment, I had believed I was the monster in the story. What struck me most in those quiet miles wasn't the betrayal itself, because Becca had always existed in that morally gray space where every act of deception was painted as necessity, every manipulation recast as misunderstood love. What shook me, what truly stayed with me, was how far she was willing to go to make me doubt my own memory, my own ownership, my own sanity. She had known exactly how to spin the narrative, just like she always had since we were kids. When she stole my favorite necklace and insisted I'd lost it, when she cried after we fought and Mom instinctively comforted her first, when she told people I was just sensitive, because that was easier than admitting she enjoyed getting under my skin. And still, I hadn't expected her to lie about a child. But that's the thing about people like Becca, the moment they realize your silence isn't a surrender but a strategy, they panic. They don't know how to exist without being adored or at least feared, and when neither option is available, they start unraveling. And unravel she did. The texts resumed barely an hour after I got home, just as I was dropping my bag inside the front door and taking off my boots, half expecting her to have the audacity to show up in person. The first message was curt: "Don't make this worse than it already is." The second was longer, filled with phrases like misunderstood intentions, trying to protect the family, and, of course, you always twist things. I didn't respond. I made myself tea, I turned on some slow jazz that sounded like snow falling on glass, and I let her words sit in the unread inbox like junk mail from someone who thought they still had power over me. It was only when Mom called, not texted, not left a voicemail, but called, directly, that I answered. Not because I wanted to hear what she had to say, but because I needed to know whether she was still orbiting Becca's version of reality, or if she had finally opened her eyes. Her voice was tight and soft, the way it always got when she was choosing every word like a minefield was laid in front of her. "She told me you threatened her," Mom said, not asking, not accusing, just laying it out like a line she had to read off a script she didn't write. "That you showed up angry, that you scared her." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told her the truth, that Becca had used a fake baby photo from the internet to manipulate me into turning the power back on, that the crib was empty, that there was no child, no emergency. No version of events in which her actions could be interpreted as anything but premeditated cruelty. There was a pause then, long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped, until she finally spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. She said, "You've changed," she whispered. And maybe I had. Maybe I had changed. Maybe I was no longer the daughter who swallowed every slight, who ignored every betrayal, who stayed quiet because it was easier than being painted as difficult. Maybe I had finally crossed that invisible line where self-preservation starts looking like vengeance to the people who were never held accountable for their behavior. "I'm filing a claim," I said, interrupting the silence before she could retreat further into Becca's fantasy. "For property fraud." She forged my signature. "It's on record. This isn't a family issue anymore. It's legal." She didn't say anything else. She didn't plead. She didn't apologize. She just hung up, and I stood there in my kitchen holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. The next day, I drove into town and sat down with a lawyer. I brought the trust agreement, the tax records, and every message Becca had sent. He flipped through the papers without much reaction, just nodded occasionally and made a few notes on a yellow legal pad. When I told him she had faked a child's existence to manipulate me, he finally looked up, one eyebrow raised, and said, "Well, that's not a first, but it's definitely a creative spin." We filed the claim within 48 hours. 2 weeks later, a notice of property fraud and ownership dispute was posted on the front door of the cabin. A temporary freeze was issued on all renovations, rental activity, and occupancy. The utilities were already under my name again. I had reinstated them, not out of guilt, but out of principle. I wasn't going to let the place fall into ruin while the courts did their slow, bureaucratic dance toward justice. The final time I went up there alone, without warning, I walked the perimeter in silence, breathing in the sharp alpine air, watching the light break over the peaks like something too big for words. There was no trace of Becca's decor, no sign of life inside, just the echo of years of decisions I had made out of love, out of duty, out of some misplaced loyalty to a version of family that had never really existed. As I stood by the porch railing, I heard a car crunching up the gravel drive. I turned, expecting Tyler, maybe even Becca herself, but it was Dad, just Dad, driving the old Subaru he kept for trips like these, the one with the heater that only worked when the engine warmed up for 20 minutes. He parked, got out without a word, and walked up to me like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to say. He handed me an envelope, plain, sealed, my name written on the front in Becca's handwriting. I opened it carefully, half expecting venom, but what I found was one page, typed simple. "I wanted something that was mine," it read. I didn't know how to ask for it without feeling like I was losing. "I thought if I could just push you out of one thing, I'd feel more secure in everything else." That was it. No apology. No admission of guilt. Just a confession wrapped in self-pity, as if the act of betrayal was something I should now understand because it came from fear. Dad didn't stay long. He looked out over the ridge, hands in his pockets, and said, "Your mom's moving in with Becca for a while. Says things are tense at home." I nodded. He didn't elaborate. Neither did I. He left without hugging me. And as I stood there, alone again but not broken, not confused, just rooted in something stronger than bitterness, something like truth, I realized I didn't need them to admit what they had done. I didn't need an apology or reconciliation or some picture-perfect holiday where we all pretended to be better than we were. I had the deed. I had the records. I had the proof. But more than that, I had myself, the version of me that no longer begged to be invited. Because some cabins aren't just places where people go to play family. Some cabins are battlegrounds. And sometimes, you win by burning the invitation and locking the door behind you.